New York City was a stage, and tonight the drama began beneath the neon glow of Midtown. Anthony Reed, the real estate mogul, was toasting his latest success at a launch party on the top floor of one of his own skyscrapers. Anthony was the epitome of power, sharp, with a cynical smile and an unwavering belief that everything and everyone had a price. He wore a Swiss watch worth more than the neighborhood he had just demolished to build this new monument to his ego. At his side, smiling coldly, was Clara, his fiancée, a figure of calculated elegance in a dress that seemed woven from shadows and diamonds. Clara wasn't just beautiful, she was precise, a social engineering machine who perfectly complemented Anthony's empire. But behind that polished smile lay a storm he couldn't even imagine. The story Anthony barely glimpsed wasn't about the new tower, but about the fateful deadline Clara had imposed upon herself. 7 days. 7 days to dismantle, piece by piece, the man she was about to pledge eternal love to. The clock of revenge had started ticking the exact moment she clinked glasses with him. Why is the rich, perfect fiancé planning the destruction of her magnate fiancé? What terrible thing did he do to deserve this punishment? Clara watched him from a distance. She remembered Elena, her younger sister, her brown eyes full of artistic dreams for a future Anthony had, with a simple stroke of a pen, turned into a nightmare. Elena wasn't a business rival. She wasn't a competitor. She was the owner of a small, historic art gallery that Anthony bought, not out of necessity, but out of pure caprice, simply to demolish it and secure more space for his new luxury project. The gallery wasn't just a building, it was her family's legacy, their safe haven after the loss of their parents. Elena begged, cried, showed its cultural value, but Anthony merely laughed, signing the eviction order with a bureaucrat's callousness. Unable to bear the loss and trauma, Elena suffered a nervous breakdown that led to an irreparable tragedy. The pain of losing Elena wasn't a superficial wound for Clara. It was a black hole consuming her soul that could only be filled by the total ruin of the man responsible. Clara's revenge wasn't about money. Her own inherited wealth from her mother was vast. The revenge was for dignity and for a life, and it had to be executed in 7 days before the marriage contract legally bound her to the monster. Day one began with an almost imperceptible move. Anthony, exhausted from the party, went to his home office, where Clara was waiting for him with a tea tray and a smile he considered lovely. While he was distracted by talk of the wedding guest list, Clara was typing on her laptop, logged into Anthony's network with the password she had obtained weeks earlier during a moment of feigned intimacy. She didn't access the bank accounts, that would be too obvious. She accessed the regulatory compliance files. Anthony was in advanced negotiations to purchase a vast tract of land in Miami, a deal that would double his empire. The success hinged on him submitting clean documentation that complied with rigorous environmental laws. Clara, with the precision of a trained hacker, injected small but lethal modifications into the environmental impact reports. She altered dates, swapped soil test data, and inserted references to protected migratory bird species that were accidentally omitted from the original reports. The changes were subtle, undetectable by common software, but explosive to a human audit. She slipped out of the room before he noticed, with a kiss on his forehead, while Anthony, blinded by his own ego and exhaustion, barely registered the scent of her lotion. On day 2, Clara's first strategic hook began to tighten. Anthony received an urgent call from his chief counsel, who was confused by what appeared to be a grotesque administrative error in the Miami reports. The lawyer, his voice tense, warned that an anonymous competitor had raised questions about the land's environmental legality, forcing the government to reopen an investigation. The Miami deal stalled. Anthony was furious, But his rage wasn't directed at the flaw itself, but at the fact that the process had been interrupted. He yelled at his lawyer, cursed the bureaucracy, never suspecting that the failure was under his own roof. Clara was in the building's gym, watching him through the glass windows as he shouted into the phone. Her calmness was the antithesis of his chaos. "One day down, Anthony," she thought, as she increased the treadmill speed, burning the old anger with the rhythm of her heart. She planned every step of the revenge, with the cold detachment of an investor waiting for the right moment to sell. Day 3 was dedicated to destroying trust. Anthony wasn't just a magnate. He was supported by a board of seasoned investors, loyal but deeply risk-averse. They were the bedrock of his power. Clara had spent the last few months not just seducing Anthony, but mapping the vulnerabilities of his advisors. She knew that Mr. Henderson, the oldest and most conservative, had a son with an expensive online gambling addiction. She knew that Ms. Davison, the youngest and most ambitious, was having a secret affair with the CEO of a rival firm. That morning, Clara sent 2 anonymous packages through a complex network of VPNs. To Henderson, it was an encrypted bank statement showing a massive withdrawal from his son's account, linking him to an illegal Macau casino. To Davison, it was a blurry photo of her in a luxury hotel, accompanied by a ciphered text that did nothing but plant the dread of being discovered. The goal wasn't to destroy their lives, but to sow the seed of distrust between them and Anthony. At the afternoon board meeting, the atmosphere was glacial. Davison and Henderson were nervous, distracted, and refused to support Anthony's next major acquisition, citing regulatory instability. Anthony saw his power wane, and he attributed it to the advisor's weakness and old age, never to his own blindness. Clara, sitting at the end of the table, smiled, offering him water with a look of feigned concern. Day 4 intensified the financial pressure. The Miami deal was paralyzed, and now, with the board's distrust, the stock price of Reed Properties began to subtly decline. Clara used the Marshall Group, the same fund from the previous script, to carry out a series of coordinated stock sales of Reed Properties, but she did it through trading bots that made it look like an organic market reaction. As the price fell, the narrative of instability was reinforced. That evening, Anthony was at an expensive restaurant, calling his brokers, frantically trying to inject capital to stabilize the shares. He was obsessed with the numbers. At this moment, Clara entered with her second tension hook, a public display of control. In a fit of rage, Anthony tried to take out his frustration on a waiter, calling him incompetent and threatening to fire him. Before the waiter could react, Clara intervened, cold and calm. "Anthony, please," she said. "That's unprofessional. Apologize." Anthony stared at her, shocked by the public intervention, but the pressure in his eyes forced him to swallow his pride. He offered a cold apology, and the waiter left. What Anthony didn't realize was that Clara was testing how far she could go. She had achieved a small moral victory over him in public, and he had yielded. 4 days, she whispered to herself, and he's already cracking. Day 5 was the day of personal truth. Clara knew the key to Anthony's ruin was his reputation for integrity, which, though false, was essential to his business. She knew that years ago, Anthony had used charity funds intended for an elderly care home to cover a personal debt, an old crime swept under the rug. Clara had spent months tracking down the only employee who had the proof, a retired accountant named Mr. Thompson. She set up a secret meeting with Thompson at a discreet cafe far from Anthony's eyes. She didn't use threats, she used a moral appeal. She spoke about Elena, the demolition of the gallery, the tragedy caused by greed. She didn't ask for the file, she asked for justice. Thompson, tired of carrying the weight of the guilt, handed Clara a USB drive containing bank statements and emails that proved the fraud. That night, Clara returned to the penthouse and sat on the terrace with Anthony. She talked to him about the moon, about the future, faking an intimacy she didn't feel. The USB drive containing the weapon for his ruin was in her pocket. On the morning of day 6, the stock market opened, and Reed Properties shares plunged 40% in minutes. The Marshall Group, in coordination with the funds Clara had discreetly bought, flooded the market with shares, creating a panic sell-off. Anthony was in his office, screaming on the phone, trying to stem the avalanche. His face was grey, veins bulging in his neck. In this moment of absolute chaos, Clara, in a white silk dress, walked into the office with the composure of a Greek statue. She closed the door silently. Anthony, nearly weeping, begged for help, asking her to inject some of her own money to stabilize the shares. He called her his partner, his only salvation. He had fallen into the trap of ego, believing she truly loved him and would save him. Clara walked slowly to the glass desk, stopping inches away from him. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She spoke in the coldest voice he had ever heard. "You wanted power, Anthony? You wanted control? Power is having the ability to destroy someone's life and walk away unscathed. Control is knowing you're trapped and I'm holding the key." She then placed the USB drive with the charity fraud evidence on the desk, followed by an envelope containing the divorce petition, pre-signed by her, voiding the marriage in case of misconduct, and an injunction freezing all his assets. "What is this?" Anthony whispered, shaking. "I am Clara, and I am also Elena's sister. The owner of that insignificant gallery you demolished that led Elena to a breakdown. You didn't just destroy a building, Anthony. You destroyed a life, and you don't even remember her name." She detailed the revenge, the stock purchases, the regulatory fraud, the distrust planted on the board. "You taught me that passion is irrelevant and power is everything. I used your own power, your blind ambition to dig your grave. Your reputation is now garbage, your assets are frozen, and tomorrow the news will report on the fraud you committed against the elderly. You are ruined, Anthony, not for lack of money, but for lack of decency." Day 7 was the day of total ruin. Anthony was arrested for fraud and tax evasion early in the morning, based on the evidence provided by Clara and Mr. Thompson. He was escorted out of the tower that bore his name, and the newspapers plastered the headline of his spectacular fall. Clara, wearing the same dress from the party night, stood on the penthouse terrace, watching the sunrise over the city. She felt no euphoria, she felt peace. The revenge was complete. Elena's dignity had been restored. She hadn't just ruined him financially, she had ruined the legacy he cherished so much. She had won. The story of Clara and Anthony forces us to confront the true cost of greed. Anthony, in his arrogance, never saw the humanity behind his business dealings, and it was that humanity, in the form of a sister's pain, that became his executioner. He lost his marriage, his company, and his freedom, all in 7 days, because he refused to remember a name, a face, a life he had crushed. Clara didn't become evil. She became the instrument of an unforgiving justice. And what about you? Do you believe Clara was justified in using seduction and deception to ruin Anthony, even if it was to avenge her sister's death? Do the ends justify the means? Leave your honest comment below, as your opinion on the limits of morality is what makes these stories so real and complex. If this narrative of calculating revenge and relentless justice resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next compelling stories. And of course, like the video to help us keep bringing you high-impact dramas like this one. Thank you for watching and for being part of the debate.